Hi, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times, filling in for Sam Roberts. The most recent congressional hearings investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol have revealed how former President Trump and his allies attempted to invalidate the 2020 election by force. It's been labeled a campaign of bullying and bluffing. Luke Broadwater of the New York Times is covering the hearings, and he joins us from Washington. Luke, thank you for joining us on what's another busy day. Let me cut to the chase. Have these hearings increased the likelihood of an indictment of former President Trump for what happened that January 6th?
I think that's hard to say because no one can really know the inner thoughts of Merrick Garland, the Attorney General. That said, they have laid out new evidence and new legal theories for the Justice Department to pursue if they want. They have essentially provide a roadmap to several different potential crimes that could be charged against the former president. And we do know that as the committee has laid out this evidence, some of the Justice Department's investigations have increased their intensity. We saw new subpoenas go out just yesterday seeking information about the scheme that we now know Donald Trump was personally involved in about putting forward fake electors to undermine the election. And we understand there are Justice Department raids and subpoenas going on and people's phones being seized just this week. So, there is an active criminal investigation going on. At the same time, you're seeing the congressional investigation. And the Justice Department has asked to review every single transcript of the January 6th committee. So I do think it's providing evidence for the criminal investigation, and it's also providing a roadmap and then also public pressure on the Justice Department to take some action here.
Would there be just an institutional resistance to indicting a former president for fear that it's going to lead in the future, if only because it might lead in the future to whichever party has got control of Congress or got control of the government of indicting the predecessor? I mean, how fearful are they, no matter how guilty or not guilty one may deem Donald Trump for what happened, how resistant is there in the institutions of government to going a step that's going pretty far?
Yeah, the people I talk with who are familiar with the thinking at the top of the Justice Department is in fact a concern. We have no precedent in this country of indicting our former presidents or charging our former presidents. And there's a great reluctance to have America turn into a country where one party comes into power and tries to throw the other party in jail, right? No one really wants to go down that path. There's a huge reluctance to doing it. That said, there is an argument on the other side that if you don't punish criminal behavior from the president, then what is to stop the next president from doing something even worse or just as bad? And we do know that the investigation is moving beyond just the rioters. We've seen about 850 people charged who were at the Capitol that day, some who fought police and stormed the building. But it's moving up the chain now. I do think, I've heard it posited that there's a separate standard for a president, that Merrick Garland would only bring a charge if he was 100% certain of conviction, that it's not the kind of case where you kind of roll the dice and hope the jury finds in your favor. Whereas, lower down defendants may be charged with just the beyond the reasonable doubt standard, where there may be an even higher standard for going after President Trump.
I'm not sure how anybody can be 100% sure of a conviction. I don't know if there's such a thing as an airtight case in reality. But have you learned things? You mentioned a few points earlier. Are there broad points about what happened that January 6th that we're all learning that we perhaps did not know before, and that makes these hearings indeed very worthwhile and not just political theater?
I think the answer is yes. Every hearing, and I've covered this case quite closely, as have multiple people at the New York Times. But each hearing, I've learned new evidence that I thought was very newsworthy and potentially explosive. We saw John Eastman, who was sort of the conservative mastermind of this plan to keep Donald Trump in office, an email to Rudy Giuliani where he asked for a pardon. That was new evidence of potential criminal intent, or at least the fear of criminal exposure from these actions. We saw how close the mob got to Mike Pence that day on January 6th, only 40 feet away. That wasn't previously known to me. We saw Trump official after Trump official tell investigators that they told Donald Trump directly that the election wasn't stolen. I mean, we kind of knew some of that stuff was going on. There have been newspaper stories about it, but to hear advisor after advisor out of their own mouth say they told him this directly, that I think establishes that Donald Trump knew or should have known that what he was saying was false when he was telling the whole country that he had really won the election and was taking multiple steps to try to stay in office.
You had a story in Thursday's paper in which Republican leaders and others in that party are regretting that they have basically boycotted being part of this commission, except, of course, for Liz Cheney and Kinzinger. In private, surely you have off-the-record conversations with a lot of these folks. Are they willing to admit, at least privately, that there is culpability on Donald Trump's part, no matter how much publicly they want to go defend him, and regret that they're not on the committee to defend him?
Yeah, I think that, obviously Donald Trump has his diehard supporters in Congress who believe he can do no wrong. But there is, and then he has his major critics in the Republican Party as well. But there is a gray area in the middle there where there are people who don't want to criticize Donald Trump publicly, mostly because their voters still love Donald Trump and support him all the way. But they know privately that what he did was very wrong. I think the best example of that was Kevin McCarthy, who those tapes came out from our colleagues, Jonathan Martin and Alex Burns, where he was saying one thing privately to Republican leadership at the time about Donald Trump's culpability, and then publicly was going out and defending him vociferously. So, that it's hard to see a clearer example than that one, but that belief is quite common among many Republicans in Congress, where they privately will acknowledge what Donald Trump did was very bad or even criminal, but they don't want to fight him publicly.
I'm not quite clear actually what happens once these hearings are done. Will there be a report? Will there be recommendations for prosecutions by this committee? Are the hearings themselves the point rather than a report or something other than the hearings?
Well, the hearings are now expected to stretch into July.
Right.
And they're continuing, and the committee has said they will continue to investigate. They keep finding new evidence. And in fact, some of these hearings have prompted more people to come forward to them with evidence. The plan right now is for the committee to release its findings in one major report in September. I'm told that report may be delayed. It might just be a preliminary report in September and then a final report in December. But the committee does dissolve at the end of this Congress, and Republicans are expected to take over the House and would not keep it going. So they have to finish their work this year. And so they have several goals. One, they have to write this authoritative report to get to the bottom of everything that happened with January 6th and the build up to it. Two, they're supposed to put forward legislative recommendations to try to prevent something like January 6th from happening again. Some of those involve reforms to the Electoral Count Act, potentially the Insurrection Act. And then finally, as they're going, most of the members, and this is not really part of their mandate, but it's something that the members want to do, they're accumulating evidence of criminality. And so whether they do a separate criminal referral to the Justice Department or whether the report serves as the referral or these hearings do, that is also a goal of the committee, is to essentially accumulate all the evidence that they can of crimes that happened and then make the Justice Department aware of them.
Luke, we're on the 50th anniversary of Watergate. How comparable are these hearings to those extraordinary Watergate hearings that a lot of viewers are probably old enough to remember very clearly? They were galvanizing. And do these hearings have a similar impact?
That's a comparison that's talked about a lot in Congress. From what I can tell, because of our modern day ecosystem of media, they are not having the same impact nationally across the board that the Watergate hearings had. We're a very divided country. People get their news from all different outlets. Some people don't want to hear a thing negative about Donald Trump,
Right.
and so will not tune in. The analogy I heard that was probably more on point is the Iran-Contra hearings. And so there is an impact, there is evidence. It may be moving the needle some for some people, maybe in the middle of the electorate or maybe even within the Republican Party, but it's not the kind of uniform, momentous event that the Watergate hearings were for the country.
Well, actually,
part of that is Donald Trump's not in office anymore, right? So there's not this threat that the president might resign in the middle of this, for what it's worth.
Something you said anticipated another question I had, which is, indeed, is there a single mind being changed by any of this? Or is it only at the margins?
I don't know. I do think we're so entrenched in this country and our political camps that it's hard to change anyone's mind. But I have noticed a little bit of movement, certainly on the conservative media side. You notice Fox News didn't carry the first hearing, but after the first hearing, they started carrying all the subsequent hearings, and they started discussing it somewhat legitimately. You heard her host on Fox News saying, "Well, I don't know how the Republicans could have rebutted that," or similar comments to that. And two papers owned by Rupert Murdoch also ran what I would say negative editorials about Donald Trump after the first hearing. So, and tens of millions of people are watching these. 20 million people watched the first one. I doubt every single person who watched that was a diehard Democrat. So maybe there is some impact there in the margins. It probably matters more, I would say, for 2024 than 2022, and more about Donald Trump's future than who controls the House.
Fair enough. We have only half a minute left. Very quickly, the testimony of those courageous poll workers that we saw the other day, do we have a problem now in getting poll workers? Is this going to affect future
Yeah,
elections?
I think so. You heard testimony that the entire office had resigned over the threats they were getting. One thing I do know that the Senate is working on right now is a bill to try to give some protections to poll workers as a result of what happened in the build up to January 6th. But it's a real concern, when you see threats against, just regular folks who just want to do their jobs normally because of lies and misinformation.
Absolutely. Thank you. New York Times Congressional Correspondent Luke Broadwater, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, the man who put away John Gotti, the notorious mob boss, put him away for good. It has been a while since the front pages were dominated by mob wars and mafiosi bodies were strewn across city pavements. A new book that I reviewed for the New York Times, written by John Gleeson, The Gotti Wars, Taking Down America's Most Notorious Mobster, is a useful reminder, especially for mafia romanticizers, that we're dealing with, let's face it, psychopathic knuckle scrapers who have settled scores with casual brutality. John Gotti was no exception. He cultivated the dapper Don image, a wisecracking wise guy with a knack for beating the rap. That is, until John Gleeson got in the way and put him away for good. Welcome, John Gleeson. I should say Judge Gleeson. You were a judge for a long time. Your book makes very plain that Gotti was nothing more than a thug, and a gutter-mouthed thug at that. Have we as a society glamorized the mob and why, a bit too much? They were, The Godfather was honored on the 50th anniversary of its first screening at the recent Oscar ceremony. Why did we think we've done this?
Well, first, thanks for having me on your show. I'm very grateful. And you've kind of put your finger on what I think was the most distinctive part of that era. It was an era of federal law enforcement in New York that was special in a lot of ways. But one way was it placed in the sharpest possible relief, for me, the difference between what our culture, which really belongs on a therapist's couch when it comes to the mob, what it sees in the mob and wants to see in the mob and superimposes on the mob, and what's actually there. you know, and look, we've glorified and romanticized outlaws forever, Jesse James and Bonnie and Clyde.
That is true.
We have a special thing with La Cosa Nostra. You know, we all grew up on, I grew up on The Godfather. I have it practically memorized. It turns out that one fact is art has done a really terrible job, whether it's a Godfather's movies or The Sopranos. It's done a terrible job of imitating life. And, you know, we saw that. We saw the disconnect. As, you know, I spent 10 years investigating and prosecuting John Gotti and the people around him. We saw that there was this fascination with the mob, but there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it. We were just doing our job.
Mm-hmm. This has not been your work, obviously, for a very long time, but do you have a sense of just how potent the Mafia, anyway, is these days, or has it been supplanted by, in our gorgeous mosaic, to use that phrase, by other ethnic groups having taken over?
I do, you know, and there were two dimensions to that period that ended in '94 when I went on the bench, that brought an end to the mob as we knew it. One was this celebrity boss thing that John Gotti decided he was going to do. You know, FBI agents are human beings too. Mm. And when you decide that you're not going to be like every other mob boss and lay low, and, you know, people who follow this know the famous Chin Gigante stumbling around Greenwich Village in a bathrobe for 20 years, all to stay off the radar screen. John Gotti decided he was going to be a celebrity boss. And it brought the talents of the FBI down, not just on him and the Gambino family, but all 5 of the families. The other piece to it was he was not a good boss, in part because he chose this route, being a celebrity. And he caused his underboss, Sammy Gravano, who we indicted with John Gotti. We indicted the boss, the underboss, consigliere. And in late 1991, Gravano switched governments. He flipped. He went from being a defendant at my defendant's table to a witness on my witness stand. And that 1-2 punch really decimated the mob. It no longer has the grip on the unions it used to have. It's a shell of its former self.
Was Gravano's flipping a key reason you were able to win the second Gotti trial that you prosecuted, and you lost the first? But you lost the first for complicated reasons,
right?
As you say in your book.
Short answer to your question is no. It's a popular misconception. The FBI got secretly recorded conversations from that room above the Ravenite Social Club. And I learned from the first case where we indicted so many people. We just indicted 3 guys: John Gotti, underboss Sammy Gravano, consigliere Frank Locascio. And Gravano didn't flip, didn't reach out for me to become my witness until 10 weeks before trial.
Oh, really?
So I stood up and told the jury in that case we were ready to convict all 3 just on the tapes. Gravano's significance was he was entrenched within the mob for 30 years, including the other families. The mobs don't silo. They work with each other. They share the union control. Gravano helped us convict 47 guys after the Gotti trial.
Wow.
So Gravano was in tandem with John Gotti's celebrity boss gambit. Gravano flipping really brought an end to the mob.
You have some moments in your book where you have some self-criticism. One of them is that you underestimated just how terrified potential jurors were of possibly sitting in judgment of somebody like John Gotti. Is this a common failing among prosecutors of not understanding the tenuous nature of being a juror? It's
not common. And you're right, we did underestimate that. Diane Jackalone was the lead prosecutor, a fabulous lawyer. We had this sleepy case with Neil Delacroce, Captain John Gotti, 8 others that no one paid any attention to. And while the case was getting ready to be tried, John Gotti burst on the scene in the most violent, brazen possible way, murdering Paul Castellano in the busiest part of New York, busiest time of day, busiest time of year, dozens of witnesses.
That was the Sparks,
Sparks.
Steakhouse.
And what he did, the ferocity with which he burst on this, he became a household name overnight, was reflected, this was unique, in the way he defended the case. There was no hiding behind the presumption of innocence or burden of proof. That first trial essentially boiled down to, I mean, he fixed the case, but it essentially boiled down to a defense of, sure, I'm the boss of the Gambino crime family. What are you going to do about it? So his lawyers like to have jurors like him.
Sure.
John Gotti's lawyer wanted those jurors to fear him, and they did. And the judge, who was my mentor, a dear father figure to me, thought he was giving them rope with which they would hang themselves, but in turns out the wrong people got hung by that 7-month acrimonious, hostile affair.
Fair enough. The other issue that another issue that you raise in the book is the whole question of using guys like Gravano as witnesses. I mean, are they reliable?
Yeah.
I mean, what's the weakness of relying on these guys, relocated mobsters?
It's such a great issue to talk about. I've been teaching sentencing for 30 years. You know, not all criminal justice systems reward cooperation. In the wake of terrorism, more have done so. But we have this thing called the Fifth Amendment. You know, you can't ask John Gotti to account for his own behavior.
One of my favorite amendments.
It's a great amendment. So we have to prove our case through evidence extrinsic to the defendant. And one way to look at it, Clyde, is you want a ringside seat to a world-class boxing match, you got to pay for it.
Yeah.
You want a ringside seat to some of the most dangerous, parasitic criminals in New York, you pay for it. I want to say one thing about and reasonable people can differ as to whether Sammy killed 19 people, he got 5 years. A lot of people repel, or find that, revolting. And they're entitled to that. The one feature of that landscape that's insufficiently remarked upon is this. As I mentioned, we convicted 47 guys based on Sammy's cooperation. And although they didn't flip and tell us all their murders, I guarantee you they had numbers analogous to those that Gravano had in terms of bodies under their belt. And here's the more important point. Had they not been taken off the street through our prosecutions of them, how many more other murders would there be? It's not like you can quantify this in any, thing that boils down to a calculus, but it's a very important tool of law enforcement. It has to be used by people with good judgment. It's cost benefit, but I get it. I get the downsides to it. In terms of reliability, you spend a lot of time corroborating, finding other evidence that tends to show that what the accomplice, who has a motive to fabricate, a motive to please the government,
Right.
is telling the truth. And that's where really the recordings came in.
That was the social club,
Yes.
the Ravenite.
Yeah.
Are we as a society perhaps in a moral twilight zone when it comes to mob killings, as long as it's within their own ranks, in which we don't much care?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Some cynics in the criminal justice system call them misdemeanor murders.
Yeah.
So a wise guy kills a wise guy.
Public service murders.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, the one thing that was imbued in me, and I'm a lawyer, we rationalize stuff for a living. But one of the things that, when I grew up as a prosecutor, and you come into the job thinking there's white hats and there's black hats and never the twain shall meet. But, the guy lying there in a pool of blood has a wife, and he's got kids, and he's got a community. So this cheapening of the victims of mob murders grew on me in a bad way, and I found it energizing as a prosecutor.
Talking about sentencing, President Biden has nominated you to the United States Sentencing Commission, and hearings are coming up in a few days on this. Assuming that Congress passes your nomination. What are some of your priorities on this? Where have we gone wrong? We have about a minute to go, so.
Sure. Well, it's not going to surprise you that as proud as I am and pleased as I am and thankful as I am that President Biden has shown the faith in me that a nomination reflects. I've been sort of like told in no uncertain terms by those folks not to talk about priorities or policies. I will say this, the Sentencing Commission plays a fundamentally important role in federal sentencing policy. It hasn't had a quorum in almost 4 years. It needs a quorum, it needs to do its business, and I look forward, if I'm confirmed, to having the opportunity to work with the other nominees to move federal sentencing forward, because there's a lot of work to be done.
Sentences too stiff? You've written about this.
There's no secret about my, I don't consider myself soft on crime. I do consider myself thoughtful about sentencing, which some have criticized as too soft on sentencing, but everyone's entitled to their opinion.
Fair enough. Well, we'll hear what Congress is going to be in a few days. Thank you so much. Thank you, John.
My
Gleeson.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. His book, The Gotti Wars, Taking Down America's Most Notorious Mobster. It's available wherever you get your books. For CUNY TV, I'm Clyde Haberman of the New York Times. Thank you for watching.